Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Astrology Meets Economics. This is kind of what we've decided to call this. Now, today, myself and Meten are joined by a very, very special guest. It's Mario of Maneco64. Please introduce yourself to the audience, Mario.
Yes, so my channel is Maneco64, the home of alternative economics and contrarian views. And I was contacted by Gary. He follows the channel. A lot of people that interview me do that. And I don't follow astrology closely, but I find that the disciplines that I follow, like fundamental analysis and technical analysis, sometimes they correspond with astrology. So. Yeah, I was interesting to speak with you guys.
Thank you very
Yes.
much. And
Thanks, yeah.
Meten, please introduce yourself.
I'm a 10 of Plutonic Planes, and I do astrological cycles related to finances, as well as mundane geopolitical astrology and astrocartography. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, yeah. And human design. Don't forget the human design. It's very important.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Human design as well. And
yeah,
my channel is Plutonic Planes. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah.
That's it.
Superb. Now, we've got a couple of charts and a few sort of astrology bits and pieces that we're going to go on to. But at the moment, understanding the basics now, and I've done quite a few on my channel where I've talked about real money and how the banks are bailed out at night, and there's certain hidden mechanisms. Now, one of these hidden mechanisms is called the reverse repo. So, Mario, would you be able to express to our channel what the reverse repo does and how banks use it, and if you think it has any influence in real money like silver and gold, please?
Yeah, I'll start with the repo. Basically, it stands for repurchase agreement. And usually the private banks, they fund themselves daily, and they do it through going to other banks and saying, I've got some jewelry. I'm going to use the analogy of a pawnbroker. You take your necklace to the pawnbroker, and he'll give you the cash, and you bring it back the next day, and you pay a little extra more than you borrowed. And the repo market is the same thing. So JP Morgan will go to Goldman Sachs and say, I have some treasuries here. Can you give me $100? And they do. And then the next day, they have to buy it back for $101. So that's how Goldman Sachs they repurchase from Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs makes a dollar. So that's the repo market. The reverse repo is just looking at it from the angle of Goldman Sachs instead of JP Morgan. It's the same thing. But the reason it's important is when the banks don't trust each other, so they won't do a repo with them, even though they're giving them collateral, because they think that bank is in trouble. So the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England has to step in and perform the repo with the other banks. And when the central banks do repos for the banks, then you know that the banks are in trouble because they have to go to the lender of last resort. And the other day, I think it was Tuesday, when is the they really hammered gold and silver. The repo for the New York Fed went up to 30 billion, and that was the first time they had to do repos for the banks since January 4th. And it coincided with the activity in the COMEX. And the last time they did it, really, I think it was 75 billion on the 31st of December. And some people might say, oh, that's because it was end of year, like accounting. But if you look at the previous year and before that, there was nothing happening then. So yeah, I think the Fed knew the banks were in trouble, but they didn't have the liquidity to hammer the silver futures. So the Fed provided that liquidity through the repo. And I think the other banks knew that they're in trouble because of the short shorts that you have in silver, so they won't lend to each other. So I think that's what it's telling us, that there's trouble in the precious metals, especially silver.
Yeah, yeah. I personally see it as a key indicator of bank stress versus the shorts of silver.
Yeah. Well, it happened in 2019 in September. The repo rate went from like 2%, which is near the Fed funds rate at the time, and it went up to 10. So, and that's when they had Start QE again. And then we had the COVID crisis a few months later, and that gave them the excuse to lend trillions to the banks out of thin air. So I think, yeah, the COVID crisis was just a cover for that banking crisis. And at the time, yeah, I'm not sure. I forgot what it was. It wasn't the precious metals market, but it was probably another derivative. They always, the trouble always starts with derivatives because they leverage to do derivatives. It's not like, you buy a loaf of bread and you pay for it. They buy 100 loaves of bread and just use, they buy it for a fraction, and they always leveraging.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a statistic at the moment where out of $10, eight of those dollars were created during the COVID pandemic era.
And they're still around. So that's inflation. That's
Yeah,
why
yeah,
that's why I think, you asked me why I th thought gold and silver are going to keep going up this year. That's mainly it because they haven't deflated. They deflated a little bit the money supply from 2022 until maybe a year and a half ago. But now if you look at M2 in the US, is making new highs. So but most people don't look at that. They think that the CPI is inflation, but that's just a measure of prices.
yeah. And it's also a fake measure of prices, isn't it? Because as soon as something goes up over a certain value, they then take that out of the basket and put something in that's cheaper.
Yeah, or they use hedonics. So if a car in 1990 cost $20,000 and now the same kind of equivalent car costs 80,000, uh, they say it's the same price because it's much better quality or it's got more gadgets, but your salary hasn't gone up as much. So, yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah. And again, what we're fundamentally talking about here is fiat currency debasement, isn't it?
yeah, that's right. And that's why they don't want you to look at M2 money supply because that shows you how much, currency they're creating. And that's the real debasement, like you say. It's really easy to create currency out of thin air, but to create real things and put your own effort into things is much harder. And that's why your effort and what you create become harder and harder to purchase with that fiat currency. And that's really what inflation is. It's got nothing to do with the excuses they usually give, like Putin is because of Putin or something else. It's really simple.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. Well explained. Now, we have an awful lot of market manipulation within the system. And I will get onto real money in a minute because fundamentally what you expressed was for me and my understanding and obviously Meten's understanding is that the only real money is physical gold and silver because everything's built from that. But what we have on top of this is the market manipulation, don't we? So we have loans on top of loans on top of loans, creating bubbles that then create this system of fragility within the system. Um, is this fragility something you see causing the price of silver and gold to continue to rise?
Yeah, definitely, and now that they're losing control of keeping the prices suppressed, the paper prices, it's going to be it's going to show up even more. And I think one of the reasons why it's happening, that they're losing control, is that countries like China, India, and others, they actually don't want paper silver. They want real silver. And silver is becoming even more and more important. And the higher the price of silver goes, the more of a monetary asset it becomes because, if you're a central bank or a very wealthy individual or family, you don't want to store tons of silver at $10 an ounce. It's too much volume and too cumbersome. But if it's at 250, it becomes a lot more attractive to store. So it's like I think they call it it's like the opposite of economic law usually. Like the usually when prices go up, there's less demand for things. Is it the Giffen good or yeah? So
Yeah,
if
I think it's the Giffen principle, isn't it?
yeah,
Something strange. Yeah.
so with silver, yeah, the I think the higher the price goes, the more people want to store it as a store of value, and even like with jewelry and you know if silver is at $10 an ounce, there's no status symbol in wearing something like that as silver. But if it's 500, and not many people have it, you will want it to show off. I'm not saying I would do that, but in general, people do.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Now, you mentioned China very, very quickly then, and for me, China and the BRICS nations are far more important in this whole scheme than anybody's currently given credit for. Now, I've saw that China was going to reduce um, exports out of China silver wise, and we've also seen something very strange where the physical China in the Shanghai bullion exchange has been around $20 more expensive than it has in the paper market in the COMEX. And I'm sure I heard you say the other day that at the end of this month there's something else that China are going to do. Can you explain what that is? Because I think I missed it last time.
Yeah, I think it was a couple of days ago. I mean, I saw someone post on X that they're going to bring in rules on the Shanghai Futures Exchange, whereby only authorized like dealers in silver, people who really need to hedge real physical silver are going to be allowed to participate and go short in the market. So, like they're trying to cut off the speculators. And I think they're doing that from the 27th of February because they know that COMEX in the US, that's when they're going to need to like deliver. So they don't want, yeah, people from that market coming in and taking all the silver. They're trying to tighten things. Yeah, and the guy who posted that, he said that Shanghai was declaring war on the paper market, which is COMEX.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think there's been something going on in China, or there was something that went on in China in January that was very, very key to all of this, and it was kind of hidden. And Isabella and I did cover this, but we only covered it in the sense of what had actually gone on. But what I think had actually really gone on is the old banking guard had tried to take over China and Xi because China smelts or refines 80% of all metals around the world, I believe. Is that the correct figure that you're aware of?
Is that silver?
Yeah, silver, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's around 60 or 70. Yeah, they process a lot of the silver, and they put i- export restrictions from the 1st of January. Yeah, they didn't ban the export, but they're going to make it even, harder for Chinese exporter to export. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So you told me about this internal conflict that they try to bring down the Chinese leadership. I guess it would make sense, even though I didn't know about it.
Yeah. Because if the old guard had managed to take, and by old guard, I'm talking about the current banking cartel that we have that are controlling our fiat currency currently, because China's moved away to bricks and clearly has enough silver and particularly gold. I know we haven't mentioned gold, but I saw that recently that Russia had gone over the 40% gold threshold in its vaults, which ties in with the BRICS requirements. If a country is controlling the metals markets the way it does, and China does, it would make sense that if your system is failing, to go after the one thing that's still working. And I think that's what we saw, Mario. You know,
Yeah. And how did you detect that? I mean,
we had Meten, myself, and Isabella had done a program together, and called Celestial Trine. And Isabella, Tarot by Isabella, is a very, very talented tarot reader and crystal ball seer. And what we did is we got Meten's amazing astrology. I mean, would you like to tell the story about how we did this? I've been talking a lot. You're on mute still.
There's so much snow shoveling. And we're talking about January, correct? Which
Yes.
date are we?
When
Okay.
when we did our celestial trine and we did our predictions and then we did the recap video, and what came out of that from China and what we saw.
Okay. So in January, and this has been for a couple years now, we've had Pluto in the beginning of Aquarius. And Pluto in the beginning of Aquarius, this will be for the next 20 years. And so wherever Pluto is, it demands authenticity. So if someone is lying or presenting false facades or as such, Pluto will tear away and destroy anything that's not authentic. Now, obviously, the markets today, as you both are clarifying, with all these derivatives, these paper markets that propose that they have all this silver when they don't, and that's all coming more and more clear to the populace, that's kind of Pluto saying, is this authentic? Is paper currency an authentic thing? Is it going to continue the work? Are we going to continue to use this when it's obviously not an authentic expression of means of money and value? And what happened in January 20th was what happened last year. And that's Pluto conjuncting the sun, the life force energy, what's visible to us. Now, what Pluto does is it hides things. Or something happens and it's hidden to the world. And so when Pluto hit the sun, when all the planets hit the sun in Kazimid, and then all the planets passed through Pluto, it was like about a week where power moves were occurring and we couldn't see it. And so the greatest example of that, which is what Gary mentioned, was the attempted coup in China. It got very little media coverage, and the whole story is an example of a kind of secret coup attempting to take out the leader, which would be the symbolism of the sun as the leader, and Pluto is like the hidden plot, the nemesis coming in to take over. Now it failed, which is real interesting because it means that there's something that about China that China is being authentic, and as you guys both expressed, China is being authentic in the sense that it's, as you just said, Mario, it's declaring war. Shanghai is declaring war on paper currencies or paper derivatives related to silver, and that's fascinating because what I had said in that particular meet that we had between Gary and Isabella was that hidden things will occur in late January that will not resurface until perhaps July and August, when it'll be made clear why these things occurred or the significance of them. And if that's true, then silver should come to a significance in terms of what's really happening either April or both April and July of this year. And that's kind of this is a summary of what I had talked about.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we've spoken about China and their, because I see this as kind of a war, and this is the war. And what I want to try and express or ask you, Mario, is if I've got this right. We're seeing a contraction of silver coming from China into the West that the West was using to buoy up its paper market with open interest exceeding the silver content in the COMEX. Now, I see a pinch point coming, and I think, and we'll get into this in a little while, I think the pinch point could be um, in April. How do you see this? Because obviously this is very buoyant for the silver price long term, isn't it, Mario?
Oh yeah, and I mean in the past you've had it was normal to have open interest be a lot more than the available physical registered silver, but it didn't matter because people didn't want delivery, but now they do. I mean, some people think it could occur next week, but you're talking about April, so what could happen? Or maybe the longs will roll over their contracts and they won't demand delivery. But I think personally, I think there's a good chance we could see some fireworks next week. And we're talking on the 20th of February here on Friday, and silver's almost at $83, the spot price. It's up like over $4 and 5.6%. And I think we could continue to see that kind of action next week. And maybe they'll get away uh, with what's coming, no, for the 27th. But and maybe that's why you're seeing something in April. But it definitely looks like they're having trouble sourcing the physical and also the longs. Unlike in the past, now they want the real silver. Like Meten was saying, it's I think is it Pluto? They want authenticity. They want real silver, and that's all part of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a fascinating combination. Now, Maten and I obviously look at astrology to try and give us hints of when things might happen. And Maten uses the astrology when the planets are in certain, configurations. Can you explain to Mario what you look for when you're doing your charts, Maten, that triggers you into thinking about what could be something that's important regarding financials with the astrology, please? You're still on mute.
Sorry, just trying to avoid. There's a lot of snow stuff going on. Okay, I'm gonna show one chart now. That way I can explain, and then Mario, you kind of had a great understanding as you shared with us when you talked about the Jupiter Saturn conjunction, because that's really probably the most significant cycle occurring that represents what's happening. And we're at the midpoint of the present Jupiter Saturn cycle. And at this midpoint is what's called the Aries vortex, and that's what's occurring today. I've been talking about it on my channel for the last year, and pretty much right now, anything that hits this point right here, you guys can see this?
Yeah.
So we have the Earth here, and then we have Pluto here in Aquarius, Uranus here at the last 3 degrees of Taurus, 27. And then we have the Aries vortex, which just means that at the beginning of the zodiac, 0 degrees, Neptune and Saturn today have perfected. And it's actually right about now. It's these 2 hours that it's exactly aligned. And so it's fascinating, huh? Here in the Pacific coast, anyways, of the United States. And everything that happens this year will be significant because it's going to hit this point. Either it'll conjunct it, which means to be in the same space, or it'll aspect it by other types of geometry. By these 2 planets here are aspecting it now by 120 degrees. Just think of a 360 degree circle, and it's basically the geometry of all the planets around that hit this point in some manner of aspect. And the whole year is going to be based on when planets hit this, which will be April. All the planets will hit this in April. And then in July, all the planets will hit this point here, this Pluto point. And these are all related, so it's like a pinball machine. If the ball hits Pluto, then it's going to hit Saturn and Neptune and Uranus. If it hits Uranus, it's going to hit these. It's like, it's like a pinball machine. Everything's going to get lit up. And that's the story for the year. Different points will be lit up and hit up, and it will cause aftershocks of whatever occurs today. Today signifies a new frequency, a new kind of understanding of the world, a new vision, and how that vision progresses forward will be relative to the planet's movement around this aspect. And so that's why we're all noting, like, at least me and Gary are noting April and July. And silver is definitely important in relationship to this Saturn and Neptune, because really what everyone understands is that we're having a new financial system being created. And it looks like silver will be very important in how this new financial system is created. And I'll leave it there unless there's questions.
Yeah. So what we're seeing is almost, if you think about the Wizard of Oz, Toto the dog, or Rudy in this case, Rudy's come along and Rudy's pulled the curtain back. And we're seeing this is the event today. The curtain's been pulled back.
So the 20th, yeah, of
Yeah, the 20th. So as we're talking right now on the 20th, Rudy has got the curtain and he's pulled it back. And we're going to see from that a ripple effect go out of the shock and awe of seeing what's behind the curtain. But it doesn't happen overnight. It ripples out. And as each planet alignment changes, it will affect certain aspects of that ripple. And April looks very, very much like a financial ripple of some sort. Now, because of the shenanigans been going on with silver recently, and how China is pulling back on the silver, I mean, it's a critical metal. America saying it's a critical metal means that they're going to have to start hoarding it. And we've also seen potentially geopolitical issues with Venezuela, with their hoards of silver that they've got in the ground in South America, and what Trump's doing. I mean, Mario, what are you seeing out of this geopolitical wave that you can see how that would potentially affect the markets in silver?
Yeah, there's also India. I don't know if you remember, they announced last year that from April this year, they're going to allow uh, people to use silver as collateral for loans. So that's also out there. And yeah, no, geopolitically, yeah, the two strongest nations in the world economically, uh, yeah, they consider silver now a critical metal or mineral, and that's huge. And that's not the futures, that's the real silver.
Yeah. Yeah, what they can physically hold in their hand. And again, Mario has been very, very clear on this on his channel, as have I, and has Meten. If you don't physically hold it in your hand, or if you haven't, as Mario promotes quite nicely, the dirty man safe, if you haven't buried it in the ground somewhere where you can get it back later, you don't physically own it. Third party, um, if you have a third party involved in your silver or gold, when what we're talking about and the squeeze happens, and it is going to be really a silver squeeze coming up, a pinch point, any organization or vault holding your material could mean that that's at risk. You know, what are your thoughts on that, Mario?
Oh, definitely, definitely, especially if they're financial or banking institutions. Maybe not like private vaults, but yeah, because the bankers they're always playing tricks. A few years ago, Morgan Stanley had to pay, I think, $8 million fine because they were charging in New York, I think they're charging clients storage fees for storing silver. And yeah, the clients found out that there was no silver there because they probably asked for some of it and they couldn't get it. So it was really bad. They first of all they didn't have the silver, and second they were actually charging them storage fees for something that they weren't storing. So yeah, I wouldn't trust financial institutions to store my silver.
No, no. I'm going to talk about the Fibonacci in a second because I think this links in very much to our silver production or prediction, I should say. But on the banks and how despicable, let's put it as kindly as I can, how despicable they are. We've had the Jeffrey Epstein stuff coming in, and it's very clear that the banks have been fully involved in the shenanigans going on with that. And when we look at some of the fines that have happened, I mean, wasn't it JP Morgan was fined $980 million for market manipulation of silver?
For spoofing, yeah. But yeah, I mean, they don't care because if they make it's like the cost of making money for them, isn't it? Even if they do it wrong. I mean, I have a list of all the fines they've paid for the last 25 years from Catherine Austin Fitts, and it's probably a lot more now. It's in the billions. So yeah.
Yeah. And those billions, let's be clear, everybody, my suspicion is those billions were created out of fresh air to pay the fines in the first. So they get given a fine of 1 billion, and they'll just on a computer tap in 1 billion and then send it over. And all that does is create more and more debasement of the fiat currency, which ultimately brings down our spending power or purchasing power of the fiat currency that we're forced to use.
That's right.
Yeah. So something that Mario spoke about some weeks ago, and it's something that obviously everybody who watches me understands. I talk about the Fibonacci quite a bit, and I've done some very interesting shows. My last one being geometry of consciousness on the Fibonacci. But it struck me very much that the Fibonacci sequence is very much involved in the fiat currency or in the financial system. Now, Mario, if you can explain that fiat current or sorry, the Fibonacci has been used as a tool for looking to the future or the past on monetary.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I joined well when I came to London from Geneva in Switzerland. Started my career in Geneva in a private bank, small private bank, and then I came to London to work in the markets, and I joined a firm called GNI, which was the biggest English futures and options brokers. And I was in the office, and one of my colleagues asked me, "Oh, did you see what happened with that Fibonacci number that we hit in such and such market?" And I hadn't even heard of Fibonacci. And then he explained it to me, and basically Fibonacci, well, he was an individual back in the Middle Ages, I think 13th century Italy, a mathematician. And I think his dad was a merchant, so had a lot of contact with the Middle East, and that's where all the maths, they were much more advanced than maths, and they learned about Fibonacci and about maths. And what Fibonacci developed was like he did some experiments with rabbits, how many, you know, like how many are born in each cycle, and he found that the numbers always matched. So, and he found that the Fibonacci sequence led to like a proportion which is 61.8%. And he called it the golden mean. And if you look at everything in nature, like your hands, like if you take from the base of your hand to where the fingers start, that should be 61.8% of your hand. And even like your body, your torso to your head, and even if you look at architecture, they've been taught through the ages, architects, to use that proportion. And so it's like it's the number of nature actually. It's like a God number even. And there's also 38.2, which is the rest of the 61.8. And it's really amazing because the sequence, you always take the number, I think, yeah, you take the first number and divide it by the second, you kind of always get 61.8. And technical analysts have found that when you look at charts, if you have a big rally in a commodity or stock, if it corrects, so a lot of times it corrects to, let's say, the 38.2 retracement of the move, or 61.8, and they also add 50%. And it's quite interesting how a lot of times it works, those things. And yeah, Fibonacci, very interesting. I went to Florence in 2019 with my wife for my birthday, and we traveled down to Pisa, and there's a statue of Fibonacci there. So I was the only one standing there taking a photo because no one knew who the guy was, but I did.
Yeah, superb, superb. So Fibonacci, without doubt, is used by the controllers of our monetary system because they understand what's going on. So let me just go
Yeah,
to,
I mean, I did economics at university and stuff, but they'll never teach you that there. I learned it, at work, from people, and not everyone at work looked at it. They thought it was like kind of voodoo, Fibonacci, what are you talking about? But nowadays, more and more people do.
yeah, yeah. There's another system they use that kind of comes off it as well. I can't remember what that's called now. I'm sure you said what it was.
Oh yeah,
The
the Lucas number.
That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Lucas numbers. So as Mario quite rightly said, and I've explained previously, for the Fibonacci to grow, it has to feed upon itself. So, for example, to get to five, it'd have to feed on three and two to create the five. And to get to eight, it would have to feed on the five and the three to get to eight. Now, what's very interesting about the Fibonacci sequence is from the first set to the seventh set, the Fibonacci has enough energy to grow and self replicate before it needs to use external sources of power, if we can use that. And below here is the sequences. It goes to 55 here for our monetary system, and what I'm going to show. 89 is quite a key point, and 11, which links into all sorts of esoteric stuff. So when we look at the crystal spiral, which is it doubles upon itself. I'm not going to go too much in it today because we're talking about the Fibonacci and the monetary system, and this is what the Fibonacci sequence looks like, and it's it's fundamentally called the Daisy of Death or Doom of Bloom because of certain reasons, as in it has to feed upon itself. Now, when we overlay the crystalline spiral, which is actually nature and creational energy, and the Fibonacci, we have axis 7, where we have the crossover point before it splits. And when we get this crossover point and it splits, for the Fibonacci to grow, it must be fed. Now, in monetary terms, I believe this is where we get debt creation. So for the monetary system to grow, they will print X amount of dollars or create X amount of dollars in the banks to then allow the bubble to grow on top of the next bubble and the next bubble. And I think we see this in the stock market. Now, the numbers are so big that it just blows my mind. And I couldn't even think about doing it. I only use a calculator in my head, and I'm very basic in what I'm doing. But as we can see, day one cycle of the Fibonacci, which is circles upon circles, when we get to day seven, we create the first Fibonacci shape. And for us to create this kind of energy, we would have to feed it. We would have to give it some kind of energy. Now, what I've done, let me just move that over this so we can see that. Fine. What I've done here is I've looked at this in silver. Now, the Fibonacci sequence and the moon are very much linked together. And silver is fundamentally linked to the moon. Now, we've had two major crashes in silver in recent history. One was in 1980 via the Hunt brothers, who I think brought around 30 something percent of the silver available, which would be the Fibonacci golden ratio almost of the 61/30, So it's very interesting that Mario brought that up. But on the 18th of January 1980, the silver high was 21.65, which is the spot price of silver in pounds sterling. Now, 21 is the eighth cycle of the Fibonacci. And for us to get to 21 in the Fibonacci sequence, it has to be fed to continue that growth. What we witnessed in 1980 was not the case. The establishment did not support the Hunt brothers in what they were doing, and so they did not feed the system and allow it to continue to grow. So as soon as we broke the 21 pound barrier, it allowed the system to crash and it dropped. What we just witnessed very recently on the 29th of January was silver hit a high, and then the system brought it back down. And as Mario will quite rightly say, that this was a controlled, in my opinion, and I'm sure, Mario, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this was a controlled demolition of the silver price to help the banks get out of the short position. Would you agree with that, Mario?
Yeah, yeah, I would.
So we had a controlled demolition of the system when we were about to go over the 89, and in this case it was 88.15 it made. But as soon as we'd gone over 89, to continue the growth of the Fibonacci sequence, the banks would have had to put money in, or they would have to pay Peter to pay Paul, if we take it in that terminology. The banks were so heavily into shorts. Mario's already discussed the shorts and how they work very clearly. That what they did is they pulled back and they got out of their short positions by using physical silver from the Shanghai system and wherever they could get it, and they reliquified themselves. Now, I know that's not the correct term. Mario, could you express that in a better way that I did, and what they did by getting out of the shorts?
Well, they basically, even though they were short, they they raided the market even more with more paper actually, and they probably acted together because it's when you have three, four, or five big banks selling short together, it's gonna really like move the market, and a lot of the banks know where traders put stop limits, like, to get out, and they trigger that, and then, it's like a self fulfilling thing because the people who had the stops, they get out, and then it triggers more stops. So they kind of pushed the market, over the edge, and so that they, of course, they had to add to their shorts, but the rest of the market fed on it. And a lot of people know already when the banks come in like this, concerted, that going short is the place to be. So yeah, it drove the market down. I don't know. It was like 30, it was huge, wasn't it? $30 in one day. I don't know how much in pounds.
11%. Yeah,
Yeah.
11%.
Yeah, and so when it got down there, the price, then the bullion banks, the banks could cover their shorts, which means they'll go in and buy and neutralize that short position. Because, like you said, if it got above 89, they would have been in trouble. And I never thought of that 80. I know 89 is a Fibonacci number, but I hadn't looked at it in terms of that it's the 11th number, which we were talking about earlier. 11 is a really important esoteric number as well, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. As in 9/11, and 11 would represent the twin pillars of certain things. And it's a it's almost known as a portal or a gateway or a doorway into something else.
Yeah, the master numbers would be 11, 22, and 33, and those are used frequently in markets, media, and geometry as well.
Mm.
Thank you very much. So when Mario says a lot of paper was traded in one day, they actually traded 2 years worth of mining supply in one day in paper. 2 years. Now that is absolutely astronomical and clear market manipulation. It seems to be being allowed at the moment. I don't understand why. Have you got any idea? I mean, obviously, it's to keep the markets and everything going because they don't want to cause a crash. Is it as simple as that, Mario, that they don't want to cause a crash, which is why they allow this market manipulation?
Well, I think, the regulators, the they're in the pockets of the bankers, and they'll do everything to help them. I think on that day, the 29th of January, uh, they should have, like, triggered circuit. They should have triggered the circuit breakers, where if silver drops a certain percentage, you stop the market for a certain amount of time to calm things down, but they never did.
Yeah.
So, and the reason they did it, because the banks were desperate and they had to get the price down, and the regulators, they'd rather save the banks than allow, the longs to win over. It's pretty much what happened to the Hunt brothers. They um, yeah, the Fed, the banks, the CFTC, the regulators, they ganged up against the longs, like the Hunt brothers, and they brought in a rule where you could only buy to close a short, and so you couldn't buy, in the market where you can't buy. It's silly, isn't it? You can only sell or buy to close a short, and that's why. And the market collapsed, and the Hunt brothers were taken to the cleaners. So in this case, they didn't ban buying, but the fact that I think, I'm speculating, of course, but that the billion banks colluded to short so much paper, that's what triggered it.
Yeah, yeah. From observing other commentators, watching you with some of your amazing guests, Andy Sheckman, who's absolutely awesome. It's exactly how I perceive it to have been as well. And again, I'm just I'm just watching and analyzing the data and trying to come up with my own ideas and look at this. Now, some people are very interested in numerology. So what I've done is I've taken the date of the silver high in 1980 and I've added all the numbers up. Zeros count for nothing, by the way, numerology. So 1 plus 8 plus 1 plus 9, etc., makes 52. 5 plus 2 makes 7. 7 in Fibonacci, if you do not feed it, will self-collapse. That for me is quite a key indicator. Now, the 29th of January that we've just had, when you add up all the numbers, what we get is 62. 6 plus 2 is 8. The reason why we didn't get a full-on crash is because they had gone over the 7th cycle and it was part of, or had been fed upon enough, that when they did the controlled crash by the silver paper flood, fundamentally, that they were able to maintain the banking institutions and everything else going along around it. I think these kind of things are quite key that we understand that's how they work. Now, when we take the 29th of January and we start adding Fibonacci numbers to it in days, it gives us some very interesting dates. One of them being the 19th of February, 21 days, which is the 8th cycle. We're recording this on the 20th, and silver's doing particularly well today, and we seem to have hit some kind of stabilization within the falling of that and of the shorts market, from my observation. When we move further, and again, remember today, Rudy's pulled the curtain back. So this date, 19th, is very close to the 20th, a couple of days either way, really are close enough. And in astrological terms, a week or so is generally seen as a direct hit, so we do have a 4 or 5 day window, and that's not me making wiggle room, it's just how it is. So it's very interesting that the 19th comes out, and today, the 20th, is such a big day with the Aries vortex. Now, the next one is 34 days, which brings us to the 4th of March. I'm going to ask Meten about this because the 3rd of March is a key date that we see something important happening from memory. And I don't know which planetary alignment it is or whatever. So, Meten, if you could let me know what's happening on the 3rd of March astrologically.
Yeah, so this year we have on March 3rd a total lunar eclipse. Now this will be the last total lunar eclipse until New Year's 2029. So it's very significant because it's the ending of a lunar cycle, of a lunar eclipse cycle. And the significance of a total eclipse is cosmic. On a soul level, it opens up a vortex. And so sometimes people will pass, and a lot of people will come in, souls will pass on to another realm. And also, and in that sense, a vortex is kind of opened up and allows for this kind of cosmic magnetic shift of humanity. And even though this week we just had an eclipse, it was a partial eclipse. It wasn't a total. So this total eclipse on March 3rd will be in Virgo at 12 degrees. So if you're a Virgo, if you know Virgos, it will affect, Virgos. And it's a full moon lunar eclipse, so it's a completion. It's an ending of something. It's a power outage. And in this power outage, because it's in Virgo, we're kind of just getting rid of things that are no longer necessary. In context of our discussion, what is no longer necessary is these paper derivative markets, obviously, because they're false. They're trying to create a veneer, a facade that's not real, not authentic. And this cleanup doesn't necessarily happen on that day. on that day the eclipse occurs, and symbolically an eclipse is a couple minutes or moments where the life force is blocked and we don't have access to it. And so deeds are done that are hidden. So the result of an eclipse, similar to like the Pluto Sun in January 20th to the 28th, similarly, the result we won't see the full effects of it until sometimes 3 to 6 to 9 months later, and sometimes almost out 3 years. But because again, this is a total lunar eclipse, full moon in Virgo, 12 degrees. It's like the universe coming in to clean up and get rid of stuff, and it'll be the beginning of that, and it'll go through the rest of the year, however long the effects of this eclipse occurs. But there are specific aftershocks that occur. In this case, those aftershocks after March 3rd will be June 3rd and again on December 3rd. And these are aftershock periods to watch for significant kind of outpourings of whatever really is occurring at this time. And this will be happening during the Mercury retrograde, which will come direct and clear up, because it's going to be a huge mess. It's going to be a Mercury retrograde in Pisces. We're all not going to be able to be thinking clearly, seeing clearly, having a clear sense of what's happening. But then that'll come direct on March 20th, which is the spring equinox. And that'll be a powerful new vision of clarity as all the planets go through Aries and re-hit the Aries vortex, which is what's happening today. So in a way, this is kind of our last moment of clarity right now. Before we go internal, we go into ourselves and kind of get self-reflective and kind of reflect on what we want to do, what we're doing, how's it going, what our vision is, and then we'll be clear again around March 20th, and then it'll be full throttle from there as we hit the sun in Aries and the explosions and an incredible fire of April, the April aspects, and then again in July. It looks like May and June might be a little quiet, but I'll stop there unless there's comments or questions.
No, that's brilliant, because I may ask I Meten for further clarification. So that then ties in to the next date, which is the 25th of March. So we've got the solar eclipse, the new beginning. A few days afterwards, we may see something on the 25th of March around that period. And I think it's going to be very confusing. But the last date that's very, very interesting to me is the 28th of April. Because that is the 11th cycle. And they dropped everything on the 29th of January. 2 and 9 is 11. January is the first month. 2026 is a 1 year, if you want to look at it like that. And even if we go back to the old calendar with January, Dis is 10, January would be 11. And although we didn't hit the figure of 89, it would have been and is the 11th number. We've got a lot of 11s going in here. Too many to ignore the fact that 89 days from when they've dropped this control mechanism takes us to the 28th of April. And as Meten quite rightly says, throughout April, I think financially we're going to see some amazing things happen. From the 10th to the 15th and the 26th are very key dates. And it could be that we don't see anything really happen until the 28th. And I suspect with silver, with the open interest, that they'll roll it on and roll it on. And it could be the fact that in April, we run out of silver. We actually physically start to see a silver shortage. And what I mean by that is we know what's going on, but the general public do not. And this could be the point in which the general public See, the emperor has no clothes. Meten, what are your thoughts on that?
In one of the books that, just real quick, is kind of fun. In one of the books that Mario recommends on his channel, he has a playlist of the 10 most influential books on economics that he recommends. And one of those books is Fiat Money Inflation in France by Andrew White. And in that book, I guess it was an early experiment where they continued to issue paper money into the markets, and that led to disaster in a really fast period of time. But what's really hilarious, as I was reading it, is that during the whole time that they're trying to justify to the people the value of paper currency and issuing these credits, they would release these flyers or pamphlets and encourage the public to sell all their gold and silver. Silver and gold have no value. You know, paper currency is the way to go. It's just, I was like, wow, you know. And that was great. That was great to see such insidious manipulation, like just attempted, right? And at least today, a lot of us have that understanding that that's not the case, you know. Um, and then so off what you said, the date for me that I see significant is April 26th, but that's what, one day off?
Couple of
And
days.
April 26th is significant because, and I'll share the image so you guys can all see it clearly again. On April 26th, if you guys can see down below, I have this in the way. Uranus here at this point in the Aries vortex is around 27 degrees Taurus. But on April 26th, it'll be at 0 degrees Gemini, which will exactly trine, or sextile rather, that's the correct geometric aspect. It'll sextile the Aries vortex at 0 degrees. And so that's going to be a mental shift, like a simultaneous kind of mental vortex shift of awareness. And that will occur across the species and affect all of us on a cosmic level. And yeah, that's what's occurring. So you fit it into that how you will, but it's very significant.
You've seen the what we said, Mario. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, we're obviously amateurs compared to you. You've got all the experience in the world, and you speak to a lot more people. How do you see this? Because I am very bullish on silver and gold, and there's also a revaluation of gold in the future potentially that we haven't even touched on, and we won't. But what do you see, Mario?
Well, I'm an amateur in on the astrology part, so but on the Fibonacci and how you combined it with the astrology, it looks very interesting. And I mean, the main reason why I said earlier, I guess, that I'm bullish gold and silver is because of all the debt that keeps accumulating, and the more debt we have, the more debt you need to create to keep the system going, just like they did in France in the 1790s. And then there comes a point where it really accelerates, and I think that's where we are right now. We're really accelerating. And the other thing about silver is that they were able to keep it suppressed for 45 years, and they had that like top limit of 50, and that's gone now. And people might think, well, then it might take a lot more years now to go up. But once you break that, it's like water, a dam breaks and the water flows through. So that's the reason technically I'm bullish silver. And then there are the fundamental reasons, like China and the US making it critical minerals, and uh, silver becoming more of a monetary asset, and also silver being really important as well for the new technologies, and also the military. Silver is used a lot, and we know that the world's getting more and more. Um, yeah, they're not, there's a lot of division and a lot of conflict going on, and it's not going to stop, unfortunately. So that's, So the fact that you guys see the same kind of thing, but through another lens, like through the astrology lens, is very interesting.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm aware of the time, Maten. Have you got any further questions or anything you'd like to finish off with?
No, no, that was great, Gary. That's the question I was going to ask Mario. So, same question. So, that's all. Yeah.
So, so Mario, Maten, thank you very much. It's been brilliant. I do appreciate you joining us. It's been, I follow you, and I'm so, honored that you've joined us and given us your time. I know you're tired because you've just come back from Ethiopia from your travels and that, and we really do appreciate everything you do. And I know, speaking from many of the people that I speak to, the work you've done in helping people understand what real money is absolutely phenomenal. And thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts for doing
Yeah,
that.
thanks.
You're welcome.
So, with that, everybody, I guess we'll say goodbye. And please like, share, and subscribe to Maneco64 and check out his work. It is phenomenal. And he has some amazing guests on there. And it's common sense, money advice that really should be heeded at these times. So, from me, goodbye.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mario.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.
Bye.